Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking on True Blue. I'm Bob Frantz. Good to have you. We've got a special guest today. Now, if you are a regular listener of my radio program, which, shameless plug here, is on WHKRadio.com each and every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to about noon, based here in Cleveland, Ohio, you know the guy because he's been on with me every week, at least once a week, for about 9 years now. But if you are new to what I do, then you are going to want to hear from Peter Kirsanow. Peter Kirsanow was appointed to the United States Commission on Civil Rights by President George W. Bush in December of 2001. But Chairwoman Mary Frances Berry told the White House it would take federal marshals to seat this guy on the commission. She fought that all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. She lost. That's a good thing. In May of 2002, the United States Department of Justice prevailed in its lawsuit to seat Kirsanow as a member of the commission. He was reappointed by President Bush for a second term. He was then reappointed once more by U.S. House Speaker Paul Ryan. He has been now appointed to his fourth term. Now he's the longest serving commissioner in the history of the commission. He also served on the National Labor Relations Board, having been appointed by then President Bush as well in 2006. He has testified in the United States Senate, before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, on the nominations of John Roberts, Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan to the Supreme Court of the United States. And he also testified at the confirmation hearing for Jeff Sessions' nomination as United States Attorney General. So to say that he is connected in the legal and political world and realm is an understatement. Let's welcome my friend Peter Kirsanow to Strictly Speaking.
Hey, Bob.
Pete, it's
Thanks
so
for
good to
having
have
me.
you in our studio,
It's
man.
great to be here.
Yeah, well, a short little jaunt for you down the block. Wasn't
Yeah,
it?
not far.
Yeah, how you feeling?
You know, we just discussed off here, I've got a herniated disc at the time. It's like somebody's stabbing me with a knife, but you know what? Power through.
I want people to know your age because, Peter, and I'm not kidding about this, and you know, this is neither here nor there as far as many of the different topics we're going to talk about today, but I want people to know you're a 70-year-old man, and until you herniated the disc in your neck, you were, for I don't know how many years, how many decades now, working out like you were 20. You wake up in the morning, you don't just get on a treadmill or a bike like some people do, you know, a stationary bike. You go out and work out like you're still playing college football. You run the hills, you run sprints up hills, you train with weights that are 70-year-old men should not be training for. What the hell is the matter with you? Why don't you age gracefully like everybody else?
Because something's loose up here, I think. You know, the body worked pretty well, but it's fun, and it, I think, makes me more productive. It gets the blood going so that I can think a little bit better, and I just enjoy it. It's a lot of enjoyment. I began working out when I've always been involved in sports, but I began hitting the weights and getting involved in extreme exercises when I was about 16. And up until I hurt my back, I was still benching well over 350 and doing my sets at about 300, and you know, deadlifts sets at about 380 to 400.
Do you have a personal trainer?
No, I've been doing this for such a long time that I know pretty well how to do it.
Does Mrs. K spot you when you're?
No. She spots an idiot, is what she spots. And the running, you know, you get the endorphins going, so it's a lot of fun. I like doing the sprints. I don't like just doing the jogging. I mean, I do jogging in the wintertime. We are in Cleveland. I've got a treadmill I'll jog on, but if the weather is even marginal, I'll go outside and run hills.
So before we started, we were talking about you really feel like your mental acuity is enhanced by your physical
Yeah,
workouts.
it is, and I think that's something that's been established by by science. But it does have an effect on me. You know, it could be that I'm simply used to it, and if I'm not working out, then somehow, you know, some biochemical reaction in me is not firing on all cylinders. But I noticed that if I do an intense workout in the morning, I'm a lot sharper. For example, I used to, up until I got a little bit older, do a lot of oral arguments at courts of appeals. And when I worked out intensively prior to that, I was a lot sharper, and I could respond to the questions from the bench much more quickly and make my opposing counsel, well, I could outdo my opposing counsel.
So is it like actual mental acuity enhancement, or is it just more awareness. In other words, I get up in the morning and I run and I get my, the blood flowing and get the endorphins going and everything else. And so I'm just more alert. And so therefore I'm thinking more clearly. Or is it an actual, is there something that, because I don't know what that science is.
I don't know. And I really don't care. I know that I'm more alert. It works. Yeah, it does. I'm a lot more alert. I'm a lot sharper. My brain moves much more quickly as a result. In the days that I don't do it, I notice a significant drop-off.
Because you see people with dementia, like Joe Biden, for example. But in all seriousness, people who have, like, as they age and they get near, whether it be dementia or any kind of other, cognitive decline and stuff, they say to enhance that or to recover that is to do Sudoku puzzles or to do Wordles and crosswords and things like that. Just do more mental things to stimulate. But you're actually saying getting on the treadmill actually gets the brain juices.
It does. I mean, I don't need to do Sudoku. I mean, look, I'm still a practicing lawyer. I write novels. I'm on the Civil Rights Commission. I do a lot of different things to keep the brain cells functioning. But I think getting that extra injection of blood actually helps. It makes me much more alert. I'm more aware of my surroundings, and I can do calculations much more quickly.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing thing. So I mean, you really are an inspirational guy, and I'm not saying that because you're here and I talk to you all the time, but I mean that very seriously. When a guy like me, a guy like my age, or people who are younger than me, whatever, see a guy, when you were in your 60s, when I first started working with you, doing the kind of work you do, it can't help but inspire. It's like, my gosh, if he can do that, and look at how healthy you are, and look at how vibrant you are, and a lot of 70-year-old people look a lot different than you do. So
I'll probably drop dead after we leave here.
But you got a disc and you're working.
Now I've got the herniated. Yeah, I'm working my way back. The herniated disc is no fun. I got it about 3 months ago. It was pretty painful. If you've broken bones or anything like that, anybody who's experienced it knows it full well. So, but kind of put it in the background, power through, and just get the job done.
Yeah, you were saying that your pain level from this thing was, on a 1 to 10, you were like at a 9.
Yeah, it was, and I think most people who've had herniated discs would concur with that.
Wow.
A number of you've broken bones. Anybody who's played football has broken bones in the past. I used to box and broke bones there. And breaking a bone is maybe about a 6 or a 7 compared to what this was.
That's incredible.
And it's still, I'd say, probably registers at a 3 or 4. But enough about that. I don't want to be a whiner. That's one thing I hate.
And I brought it up because, like I said, I want people to be impressed not only by your talent and your mental fitness, but your physical fitness is an astounding thing. So let's talk more about football, though. And
Okay.
You played football in the Ivy League in Cornell.
Yeah, if you can call football in the Ivy League football.
1970 something?
In the 70s, yeah.
In the 70s, okay. What'd you play?
I started off as tailback. I came up at Cornell through the Marinero era.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everybody wanted to be a tailback because Marinero was, breaking all kinds of records, held just about every NCAA rushing record. But quickly got shifted over to flanker.
For the younger generation, anybody who's watching right now, by the way, Ed Marinero is the guy who went on to be a TV star on Hill Street Blues.
Yeah, he was, and did some movies also, and great guy. He was also a member of my fraternity, too. And so, I played some college football, not good enough to make it to the pros. Not too many Ivy guys do, but, I had I think a reasonable understanding of what my prospects were, and decided that using my brain is probably going to be more fruitful than trying to use my legs.
So when you turn the radio on and Bruce Springsteen comes on, Glory Days hits, where does your mind go?
Probably high school football.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I had some pretty good college days, but high school football, I graduated from Independence High School, and high school football is unique. Everybody knows it. If you played high school football, you always had, at least in your own mind, the prospect of maybe making the big time. Maybe you were going to go to Ohio State and play in the Rose Bowl. Maybe you're going to get drafted into the NFL. Everything was evergreen at that point. And I enjoyed football, I think, as much or more than almost anybody. I loved the physical competition. I liked the camaraderie. Just a little over a year ago, for example, I had my 50th reunion with my first-year college football teammates. 50th reunion. And it was like we never missed a beat. You know what it's like.
I do.
It's guys who've been in the military probably know this even more acutely, but when you've gone through certain travails with a group of guys, you're forever bonded. And we email each other virtually every day, especially around the holidays. Everybody emails, but there's always an email going back and forth, updating somebody on the status of an individual. Like one of my teammates right now is having a little bit of a health difficulty. Everybody's praying for him. But, you forge those relationships. They remain evergreen for the rest of your life. And it also keeps you young, because I am corresponding with guys who are 70 or more years old as if we were 13 and 14-year-olds. We never got out of puberty when it comes to that, you know. And I like to rib guys like that, and it's merciless. You know how it is. It's merciless ribbing that you could never get away with anybody else, but you do it all the time. And if you don't get it, you're kind of like, what's wrong with me? What happened?
Because you know you're going to get as much as you get,
right, exactly.
And vice versa.
Yeah, and that's another part of the mental acuity. It keeps you sharp. You got to be on your toes. So, and the good thing about many of my college teammates is, who aren't retired, I mean, they've all risen in their respective fields to pretty astonishing heights. I'm probably the least successful of all my college teammates. They've done very well. I'm proud of them, and they're good guys.
Partner in your own law firm, member of the Commission on Civil Rights, arguing before the Supreme Court, or not arguing, but testifying before it.
Yeah.
I think you did okay, Pete. I think
it's okay.
So, tell me, you know, it's kind of funny. I had Alan Dershowitz on a couple of months ago, and I asked him, because of course he is most well known as being, you know, a Harvard Law professor, now emeritus, and of course he has argued some of the most incredible cases. He was on the OJ Dream Team jury and everything else, and he has been very, very outspoken and critical of Harvard for a lot of reasons, including some of the stuff you have done a lot of work on with respect to affirmative action and so forth. And I asked him, I said, Professor Dershowitz, I mean, you are also an alum. I mean, are you still like, you know, tight with your university? And he said, not even a little bit. Yeah. They cancel his speaking appearances. They basically have cut ties with him and he with them because of the way things have turned. So, being who you are and being what you are and having the ideology you do, and Cornell being an Ivy like that, are you still associated with the university, or have you kind of fallen off the way? Yeah. The way Professor Dershowitz did. And the reason I brought it up now is because I wonder if the connection to your football teammates and your experiences there make it a little softer of a situation.
No, yeah, I will tell you that I'm part of a group, a fairly large group, and I'm just the scrivener, that is to Cornell what Dershowitz is to Harvard. Really? In other words, we are burrs under the saddle. I have written a number of letters to the president of the university, and others to the university, on behalf of other alums. There are other Cornell alums in Cleveland. I won't mention any names, but several of my college football teammates, for example, and we will write letters to the president about a number of pet peeves that we have, because Harvard's not alone in this drift, not even a drift, it's kind of like a hard right turn off a cliff to the left. And you know, my daughter went to Cornell, she followed me there, and then she went to Harvard also. You know, she got a PhD at Harvard. And I used to brag about it, that she went to Harvard, because it was Harvard, right? It's, many people think it's the premier, or one of the premier academic institutions in the entire world. Right. No more. It's, I think for the same reasons Alan Dershowitz has a problem with Harvard. And we've seen what happened, you know, shortly after October 7th, when what we saw on a number of college campuses was astonishing, even to those of us who are, I think, up to speed on what's going on college campuses. Being on the Civil Rights Commission, I see these things in real time, but even I was amazed at the hard left. And it's not just a hard left, it's almost like an evil drift. Yeah. When you have people out there supporting Hamas after October 7th, what kind of moral cretin are you that does something like that? I don't care, you know, look, I understand there are a lot of people on the other side of the equation on this stuff, but especially with respect to the timing, I mean, my goodness, you can have a debate about Palestinian rights and Jewish rights and things of that nature, but on the heels of October 7th, what we were hearing was river to the sea and similar slogans and just outright virulent anti-Semitism.
Well, only the 3 college presidents had to testify that day. And it was the president of Harvard, the president of Penn, and the president of MIT. 2 of them are gone now because of what they said and didn't say. And then in Claudine Gay's case, it expanded into the, you know, plagiarism and the other things going on. But I'm curious, when that happened, I said, you know, they're just the 3 that were called to testify. Sure. I guarantee you there are hundreds of other university presidents who feel the exact same way they do. What's Cornell's situation?
It's very similar in terms of some very prominent, much wealthier alums than I am have weighed in on this. I've been part of that. Look, virtually every, not just Ivy League campus, but this is a rot that's permeated much of academia. And it's at the graduate level, postgraduate level, it's at the high school level. The educational establishment in the United States of America really needs to do a reckoning, a self-reckoning, because what we're seeing now is not only I think, a reduction in the standards, academic standards that we used to hew to, but there's been this infestation of, among other things, anti-Semitism, outright racism. DEI has been one of the most pernicious influences you can imagine. And what happens, it's not simply the racism or classism or anything of that nature, although that's a big part of it. When you start going down this path, it almost inexorably results in lying, is the best way I can put it. There's a lot of fraud going on. And I don't mean plagiarism. I mean, you have to accept statements that are palpably untrue on its face. The fact that almost every university seems to be, at least in the arts and sciences, seems to be just captured by DEI and the notion that there's white supremacy everywhere is just, it's one of the biggest lies imaginable. And it's a function to a large extent of we have to justify changing standards or eliminating standards in a way that doesn't acknowledge why there are differences between groups. There is absolutely no doubt right now, for example, that different ethnic and racial groups have different probabilities of being admitted to school if preferences are taken into consideration. When you looked at the Students for Fair Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, some of the evidence adduced there showed that, for example, black students were up to 10 times more likely to be admitted than similarly situated Asian students. And rather than admit that the reason—
Similarly situated meaning similar scores.
Right.
Great grades.
If you control for almost everything else, the black students got 10 times more chance of being admitted. Okay. And when the institutions are asked to explain that, they dissemble and tell you all kinds of different things that are palpably not true. Every human being knows what's going on here, and we're lying about it. But rather than do the hard work of ensuring the various elements that contribute to good academic outcomes are taken care of. For example, I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know, but if you come from an intact family, you got a much better chance of doing well academically, right? But we're trying to deny that that's the case. We're saying that, well, the reason why blacks aren't doing as well as whites is because of racism. Well, I'm not saying there is no racism, but that's not the reason why you've got this titanic gap in achievement rates between blacks and whites. Or somebody tell me that somehow racism never affected Asians, but the gap between whites and Asians is huge in terms of Asians are doing much better than whites are doing. So there's considerable amount of literature that just debunks that. But because the universities won't acknowledge that, they're engaged in lying, and it has kind of a domino effect. They start lying about all kinds of things because you can't stop with one lie.
Do they have a point about the value of diversity? Because one of the things that they like to say is the reasons they have done some of the things they've done and the numbers that you just talked about, 10 times more and so forth. They're saying we're doing our students a disservice if they grow up in a very homogenous kind of a campus life. They will be better off if they are exposed to a whole bunch of people from a whole lot of different backgrounds, multicultural and so forth, different levels of wealth, poverty and middle class and so forth. So we need a diverse campus to really mirror what the world is like. So when they graduate, they're ready for it. If they go to school with everybody who looks just like them, or a very limited number of diverse types of people involved in the crowd, that it's bad for them. Is there any room for that?
Yeah, that was the Grutter rationale back in the early the Supreme Court case. But that's not what's going on here. We have diversity only in terms of superficial aspects of diversity, skin color, sex, that's all. Because what you'll find is, there's always going to be variations, but the folks that are being admitted to these Ivy League schools, or almost any schools, they're almost uniform in terms of almost everything else, in terms of socioeconomic background and so on and so forth. So you're not getting viewpoint diversity at all. Okay, it's like you've got to go down this one narrow path, and there's only one type of thought process that's approved of. Conservative students know, and they'll tell you, almost every campus, conservative students will say that they keep their opinions to themselves because they're not approved, or they're going to be attacked if they voice so-called conservative opinions. Yeah. So no, there's no diversity of thought. That's the last thing they want. That's the last thing they've got.
Well, although, and of course, it's not just, white conservatives who are told not to speak. The Washington Post once called you the GOP's black counterweight. Is that something similar to being the black face of white supremacy?
Yeah, I'm the right, exactly. It's Larry Elder. By the way, Larry and I go back 40-something years, so it's kind of a small club, and we've survived.
Larry's done the show. We'll have to get you guys on together.
It'd be great.
That would be some fun reminiscing. But
no, I mean it's
What does that mean, the black counterweight? What are they trying to say?
Well, I suppose it's that I'm the lone black guy saying these things, and everybody else who's really black says all these other things, And it is what it is.
Did you vote for Biden? Come on, just answer so I can finish the line. Then you ain't black.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, my goodness, voting for Biden. But that's it. You're supposed to think a certain way. Back to my previous point with respect to universities. It's not just a function of the universities. It's almost every institution. Virtually every institution has been captured by the left in this country, by the way. But you have to think a certain way. And I'm not going to do that. I think you're not going to do that. And I think more and more Americans they understand for the last maybe 40 to 50 years, there's been this growing tendency to have approved thought. And as I've said on your show a number of times, go talk to people who have come from like Eastern European countries or maybe Vietnam and Cambodia, boat people like that. And these are going to be some of the most original thinkers ever because they've been liberated. And they will tell you, folks, they'll tell the United States, don't go down this path. We've seen this movie before and it does not end well. But too many Americans who maybe haven't been exposed to totalitarianism think that, good times will last forever. And if you adhere to the approved, narrative, and it's the leftist narrative, everything will be okay. You can see what's happening in society right now. Things are not okay.
Yeah, no, they're not. And we are now officially in Black History Month, which I've been calling National Division Month, because I think that's its goal, is to divide. I can't figure this out. And I played on the radio, once again, Morgan Freeman's very well-traveled and viral message on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace from a few years back, in which he says, I don't want Black History Month. And Mike Wallace said, why? And he said, well, when's White History Month? And Mike Wallace said, there isn't one. He said, by the way, I'm Jewish. He said, where's Jewish History Month? And Mike Wallace said, there isn't one. Morgan said, do you want one? And he said, no. And he goes, why not? He said, because don't we have to stamp out racism? That's why there has to be a Black History Month. And Morgan Freeman said, you want to stamp out black racism? Stop talking about it. Stop talking about it. Yeah. It is given life when everybody says, oh, black people are put down upon and not given the same opportunities today. Now, pre-1964, we have this conversation, of course, but his point was, if we keep highlighting the differences between us, you're always going to find that, that feeling of oppression versus oppressor, which of course is the core of CRT. And Mike Wallace sat there stunned about that. So Peter Kirsanow, black man living in America in 2024, do we need a Black History Month?
Black History Month started back in the days when we maybe needed a little bit more teaching of black history because we had none. Look, I'm old enough to remember when you looked at a textbook and there weren't that many references to blacks other than slavery, Reconstruction, so on and so forth, hardly any. And eventually, over a period of time, there was more inclusion of black history, historical events. But then, Black History Month, which again was designed to introduce the notion that, hey, blacks were a significant part of this country for a long period of time and were neglected in the history books, then it morphed. It became far more political rather than something that was aimed at being an accurate representation of American history. And now it's gone off the rails. And now we've got all kinds of history months, right? We've got, virtually every ethnic group claims some kind of month. And I agree with you, that's divisive. We should be teaching honestly and teaching the truth. And that's the best way of having, I think, a society that American founding had presumed we would have by this point in time. We've gone in reverse for several decades now, and I think we have exacerbated a lot of racial tension, at least in the public sphere. I think race relations between individuals is as good as it's ever been, if not better. But there's been this attempt by the so-called elite to, maybe what they're doing is virtue signaling. I don't know. I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking why they engage in the kind of ridiculous conduct they're engaged in, but it causes racial division. And again, it's a dichotomy between what the elites think and say and what ordinary people think and say. Ordinary people want to get on with their lives. They're not looking at somebody as black, Asian, or anything else like that, but the elites are constantly imposing this construct on us. And I reject it. I've always rejected it. I just want to live my life. I'm an American first. I happen to be a Browns fan second. That's about it, okay? But my goodness, we're going down the wrong path, Bob. We're going down the wrong path.
When I was growing up, I remember being in school, and we learned Black history is just a part of American history.
Right.
I mean, maybe not to the level that they should have. I mean, we learned Booker T. Washington, we learned Harriet Tubman, we learned maybe a little bit about the Tuskegee Airmen, maybe we learned a little bit about some bad stuff, the Tulsa, Black Wall Street. I mean, those things were a part of it, but it was just, that's part of American history. And guess what? Some American history, when it comes to race, racism, and so on and so forth, was very positive and uplifting because things were changed, and that's a part of American history. Some of it we had to address were the bad things that happened prior to all of that. But that was just American history. And I feel like Black History Month is not American history. We are going to rewrite, kind of like 1619 Project type stuff. We're going to rewrite it all to fit the narrative of the day today, and the narrative of the day today is people who are light of skin are descended from oppressors, and that makes them continued oppressors, and darker skinned people are oppressed no matter what happens. That revisionist history is what I get so worried about.
Yeah, and it's the emphasis also. I mean, this is the Gramscian kind of Marxist approach. It is less about history than it is class struggle in order to have a particular political hegemony. And unfortunately, it's dominated much of our educational establishment, K through 12, and especially in college. So this is where we are. We're going down a very dangerous path. I think that you're right. It's not history. It's a distorted view of history, and it makes, you could look at several different spheres of American endeavor and see how it's starting to or has gone downhill because of this. And one of those is the fact that just, contemporary headline says we're having a difficult time getting recruits for the military. Especially among white males, which is the backbone of the military and has been for a long time. Why would we have success in recruiting people for the military the way we've been denigrating the United States of America? Who would want to defend such a horrible country? In addition to which, we are denigrating, kind of traditional masculine traits. If you have advertisements that have got that celebrate transsexualism. Look, and I don't care what you are, who you are, anything else like that, but instead of celebrating martial virtues, if you're trying to recruit people on that basis, don't be surprised if you then have a reduction in white male recruits, period. Military is a macho endeavor. There's no escaping that. I don't care how much revisionism, whatever you want to say, whatever politically correct endeavor you've got with respect to rewriting American history, military service is a macho endeavor. You're not going to be attracting people based on whether or not you're going to teach them basket weaving or knitting. Macho men aren't going to go into that. Macho men want to go. They want to go into WWE or UFC or NFL, things of that nature. The Marines. That's where macho men want to go. They don't want to go into knitting.
Just a week or two ago, Peter, the recruitment numbers the recruitment standards were lowered for the U.S. Navy. You at least had to have a high school diploma to come in, and now they're basically saying you don't have to have a high school diploma, but you can take a test, and if you can score high enough, you can join. But the point is, they're lowering the standards because recruiting is so down right now, like you just pointed out. And I'm sitting there reading that, and nowhere in the article in which I read that did they reference the fact that a month ago, 2 months ago, there was a massive national advertising campaign, a recruiting campaign by the Navy featuring a sailor in drag on a battleship. standing there as a cross-dresser, you know, and basically it's almost like a parody of the village people in the Navy, you know, saying, come at you. Who's going to, like you just said, it's a macho endeavor, it's a masculine endeavor to go and join the military means I'm ready to fight. Well, guess what? Fighting is more of a masculine trait. Even in women who fight, it's their masculinity coming out or their masculine side or whatever. And they're basically saying, hey, masculine guys, come and join this crew next to the guy here in a dress, dancing on the deck of a battleship. How the hell are they, you know, how can they possibly expect that to be a spike, lead to a spike in recruiting rather than a drop?
Yeah, exactly right. I think they're engaged in this fantasy about what it means to be a fighting man. Or fighting woman, frankly. I mean, if you want to protect the United States of America, you understand that blood's going to be spilled. And the depiction of something that is not martial is not going to encourage people to join.
Yeah.
And that applies to men, that applies to women, it applies to every demographic group. But our leftist betters apparently have forgotten that. Or I used to think that this was kind of a conspiracy theory, but having been in the Civil Rights Commission for, as you indicated, more than 2 decades, you start to understand that these conspiracy theories are actually, many of them are not just conspiracy theories. Frankly, my eyes have been opened. It took me a long time, but my eyes have been opened. There are a lot of people in this country in very high positions who actively dislike the country, and that's putting it mildly. Many of them hate it. Many of them think it's the worst thing that ever happened. And the various policies that you see put into place in certain areas of academia, the government, and business are a result of that hatred. And the consequence of that, obviously, is I think a deterioration in standards is just the least of them, but I think it hurts America as a whole. And we're right now, as we sit here in 2024, personally, again, I'm 70 years old, and you know, look, I don't profess to be an oracle on these things, but this may be the most troubling time in my lifetime in America. I never thought there was a possibility that the United States wouldn't exist, say, 50 years from now. But I'm getting increasingly concerned, and it's not me. I didn't come to this conclusion on my own. I'm not smart enough. But I read, you know, our friend Victor Davis Hanson, for example, who I respect enormously, who's an historian and has got the longitudinal view. And he can point to examples throughout history where certain points, there have been certain markers that have led to the collapse of a society. And he's been writing urgently. And seems to me he's trying to wave the red flag, saying, folks, we're going down the wrong path here, and you know, we may be beyond the point of no return. And I think people of my age, many of us are concerned about that. Maybe not progressives, although I've talked to a lot of progressives who are kind of alarmed about the tack that's occurred. And there's a lot more disunity in this country, that's for sure. When I was younger, there were Republicans and Democrats, but the schisms weren't as sharp. We were still, at the end of the day, Americans. Right now, boy, there's a yawning chasm between progressives on the one side and conservatives on the other.
Why did they sharpen so much? Because you're right, they were.
Well, I'm not smart enough to know that. I could give you 1,000 reasons for it, but here's one that used to be debunked as kind of a ridiculous, warmed-over conspiracy theory. It's the old Cloward-Piven strategy of dividing us so that the system collapses and you can rebuild it in your own view, okay, in the way you want to, in a Marxist or progressive view. But anyways, society collapses so you can take over the various institutions. We can use the word Marxist, can't we?
I mean,
we can.
I mean, I think back to what the two of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement said. It's in their founding documents. We are trained Marxists. We are trained in classical Marxism, and as part of that, we are intending to disrupt the nuclear family, to break down essentially whatever the building blocks of Western civilization have been in order to rebuild it, like you just pointed out.
Yeah. Again, there's some tension between the academic version of Marxism. I like to use the Gramscian theory. I mean, I think that the Italian philosopher, who was more of a cultural Marxist, if you want to put it that way, I think that's what's really affecting society right now, kind of a cultural Marxism. The difference is not that great, but you'll see, we've just been talking about one where there's this emphasis on breaking down various elements of society and societal institutions for the purpose of remaking society in the vision of the progressives. That endeavor is not going very well. It may be going well for the progressives, but it's not going very well for society and America as a whole. America that I grew up with had a lot of faults, but it was still the greatest beacon of hope in the world, and everyone wanted to come here. People still want to come here, but that beacon, I think, has been diminished a little bit. It's not shining as brightly as it has been, and I'm going to always be a patriot, but that patriotism compels me to say, we've got a lot of work to do. The cultural left has captured almost every institution in society and made it palpably worse.
So let's talk about the Civil Rights Commission a little bit, because civil rights, we've been talking about the Civil Rights Act and what has happened before and since then, but I mentioned in my introduction there the battle you had that went all the way to the Supreme Court just to get you seated. They fought against you so hard. Tell us how that went.
Well, President Bush, I was minding my own business one day, just practicing law, and then I get a phone call shortly after President Bush was elected, and they wanted to know if I would be, they had offered me a couple of different positions within my wheelhouse in terms of employment law. Things that I was comfortable with because I'd done employment law for a long time. I thought I was pretty good at it.
How'd you get on their radar, though, even for any?
I think it's because I had written things. I'd given speeches in the past. I'd done some scholarly endeavors and probably rubbed elbows with a few people that ended up in the Bush administration. So that's how they found out. But, I mean, I was as surprised as anybody that they called me. Only my wife was more surprised, probably. But in any event, I didn't want to move to Washington, D.C. I wanted to stay here in Cleveland. So they finally came up with, they said, hey, how about being on the Civil Rights Commission because you don't have to live in Washington? I said, sure, I'd love serving the administration. And so I agreed to that. And then apparently when the left found out that they were going to get this right-wing crank who happened to be black on the Civil Rights Commission, oh man, because this is the province of, progressives, of complete, it was completely dominated by liberals. So the left went nuts. They recognized, or they believed I was apparently a threat, and they did everything they could to keep me off the commission, as you indicated, saying that it would take, I think, dogs and some hoses or something.
The quote that I found was federal marshals. It would take federal marshals to get you there and seat you on that. Well,
commission. It didn't take federal marshals, but it took a couple of court opinions. So finally, we got to the Supreme Court, and I got seated. And immediately made a pest of myself because the Civil Rights Commission had gone off the rails. Look, it was known as the conscience of the nation for a long period of time during the 1950s when it was first instituted, and there were a lot of lions of civil rights on that commission, a lot of very smart people. But I thought, and a lot of people thought it went off the rails a little bit. It became less about civil rights than advancing a particular agenda. And I think many of the people who were advancing the agenda were good-hearted people. I'm not here to say these are all evil people or anything else like that. It's just that they had a different vision that I think history has proven has been one that's mistaken and leads to really horrible results. So I didn't bring balance to the commission because I was one of the few conservatives on it, but I was a little bit of a rabble-rouser, and I'd raise my hand whenever I thought we were going down the wrong path. And that's one of the reasons why I think I justified their decision to try to keep me off.
So why'd you stay on it? It's one thing to say,
I was having
hey,
a great time.
They don't want me here. But it's a 6-year term, so they got me for 6 years. And by the time year 6 ends, you got to be thinking, I made my point. But you stayed on it. Now you're in your 4th term.
Oh, yeah. First of all, I enjoy the work a lot. And I think I can make a useful contribution. And I also think that it's imperative that conservatives not yield certain positions to the left. We do that very often. We think that's not my subject or that's not my issue. So I'm going to go off and do whatever I want to do. I'm going to take care of my family. I'm going to do whatever it is that pleases me. And I think that's how the left has captured so many institutions. I think you have to, even something as minor as the Civil Rights Commission, but we handle all the big and hot topics of the day. If you want to see what's going to be a hot topic, say, a year from now, come to the Civil Rights Commission hearing today, because we handle everything. And I used to warn people, okay, here's the next thing coming down the pike. And people would say, nah. And then it would happen. They say, holy moly. I'm sorry, television here. We never anticipated that. So I think I'm kind of, for lack of a better term, fighting the good fight by staying on there, being kind of an anchor for conservative positions so that the commission doesn't go completely off in one direction. And I think it's also a place that allows me to see what the left is proposing, and then I can get it ahead of it maybe go to the appropriate agencies if it's in the hands of, say, a Trump administration or Bush administration and say, hey, here's what's coming down the pike, and here's some counterpoints to it. Here's why this is a bad thing to do. So, you know, anything from affirmatively furthering fair housing to, yeah, I mean, there's been a number of bills that come down the way that I think I've had at least a little bit of influence in making sure it got killed in its tracks, or maybe trying to get good legislation passed. And also, you know, it's other things too. Having been on the Civil Rights Commission, I study certain areas or have access to certain materials that allows me to testify on certain issues from a conservative point of view, so that certain bills that are being thought about in Congress don't go off the rails, or certain nominations, Supreme Court nominations, for example. Again, I'm not the only one, but I'm one tiny voice among many, but we need a lot more tiny voices.
Yeah, well, yours is much larger than you think, I think. And I'm going to ask you about Supreme Court testimony in a moment, but your term ends next year, right? The end of 2025?
No, I got 2 more years left.
Oh, 2 more years.
Yeah, 2 more years. And I'll tell you what, I'll announce it right here. I'm going to tell, you know, I'm not sure who the next appointing authority is because the cycles change. Sometimes I'm on the presidential cycle, sometimes on the speaker cycle, sometimes Senate majority cycle, and I don't remember which one I'm on. But next time I go to Washington next month for a Civil Rights Commission meeting, I'm going to go up to the Hill and let them know, hey, I'm ready. 2 years from now, my commission ends. I want to re-up for another 6 years.
I was just going to ask you if you got another one in you.
I got another one in me, Bob. I got a lot of energy. You know, I may have a dagger in my back right now, but I've got a lot of energy.
You'll be 78 at the end of that one.
Exactly right. You know, some of the
Joe Biden can't count his toes. He's
what you've probably seen, even though you're younger than I am, but you start to see people who are in their late 60s and 70s and their mental acuity falls off. Yeah. Mine has, but I think if you stay engaged, it's less likely. The people who I see are engaged in rigorous intellectual or mental activity seem to maintain their youth and seem to maintain their vitality. When people retire and shut that all off, they seem to go downhill very fast. So I'm going to try as hard as I can to stay as active as possible. Right now, I'm putting out fires all over the place, and it does get a little overwhelming. I have to reconcile myself to the fact that at the age of 70, I can't lightly dance from one topic to another, but I can still dance.
So you still going to be hitting over 300 when you're 78?
Once I rectify the back, yeah, absolutely. And I'm determined to do it.
I believe you, and I believe you will do it too, 100%. Peter, the surname Kirsanow.
Yes.
Russian.
Russian. My father's Russian.
Tell us about your story.
Yeah, very briefly, because my family prefers.
As much or as little as you wish.
Sure, my family doesn't. I don't talk about my family too much, and I think it bores people. But I think I do talk about this. First of all, I'm proud as heck about my family. That's not it. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd talk about them forever and ever. But it's instructive from the standpoint of what's my locus? How has my conservatism evolved? And why am I conservative? And it comes from the fact that a large part of it is because, you know, my father was Russian. Not just Russian, but he came from the Soviet Union and was in the Red Army during World War II. I'll give you a very brief summary of his life before he came to the United States. First of all, it was hard. It was tough. It was nasty, brutish, and thankfully not short. But he was in the Red Army, fought in World War II, was captured by the Germans, and was in a German prisoner of war camp for a short period of time, but then was liberated. And then, because he had been a lieutenant in the Red Army and had said things that were perceived to be, I think it was simply anti-communist, not anti-Stalin necessarily, although he was probably, knowing my father, saying all kinds of anti-Stalinist things too, which was dangerous. Because if you did that, bullet to the back of the head. Mm-hmm. That's not, you know, that's not cinematic. That's the truth. So the NKVD, predecessor to the KGB, corralled him after World War II and put him into a internment camp. Eventually, he'd probably make his way to Siberia or something like that. We didn't know, but it was not going to be a good outcome. Many of the people who were in that camp didn't make it. We know that. But he escaped, and part of the escape is in one of my books. I just have a short vignette in it, and it's really extraordinary, the way he escaped. And I won't go on all the details, but it was something like it was out of The Great Escape. And you know, this thing about he trekked a number of miles through the Soviet sector of Germany until he was able to cross over into the American sector. It was a phenomenal story, real hero. But when you go through that, you have certain life experiences that shape you. And when you have children, you beat it mercifully into their heads so they don't make similar mistakes or believe that certain types of ideologies are simply fanciful and great and everything else like that, because socialism likes to present itself as being the philosophy of the people, of being kind, of being egalitarian, and it is anything but in practice. It is a horrendous ideology. It is the ideology of hundreds, of tens of millions, if not over 100 million deaths. It is a corrupt ideology. And my father was a very smart guy and read like crazy and compelled my sister and I to do that also, you know, just by virtue of his example, instructed us as to the depredations of socialism/communism and the benefits of the United States of America. Just to tell you, it's important, I think, for Americans to understand their history, but also, and many of us do, and many of us are insatiable readers of American history, but also to defend America, warts and all. America's got plenty of warts, but it's the greatest country in the history of the world, and I think that is the primary thing we should be focusing on. We don't just paper over the warts, but we recognize that despite the warts, we are able to prevail in so many different circumstances. And what my father hated about leftism in the United States is not only is it evil, but that it denied the greatness of America. And when you come from a place like the Soviet Union or most of the world, frankly, to America, you don't deny it. You recognize instantly how great it is. Go off on a little bit of a tangent. It's one of the reasons why I suspect a lot of Americans are so exercised about illegal immigrants coming into this country. When you came in the right way, and especially after, it was hard for my father to get here, you view being in America either as a resident, just a legal resident, or a citizen as the greatest thing that's ever happened to you. It's a gift. And we are squandering that right now. And in fact, we're spitting on it. Look, I don't have a brief against any illegal immigrants. I'd want to come here to the United States too, but we have a generous and wide open door, front door. Come in the right way, okay? Come in the right way, get vetted. We want to know who you are, make sure you don't have any communicable diseases, make sure you're not on a terrorist watch list, all those kinds of things. But we're not doing it right now. I think that is, trying to think of the right term, but it's not the way we should be operating. And got a little bit off field here, but that was the essence of my father. I mean, one of the reasons why my entire family is as patriotic as it is because we understand what the rest of the world is like, and what it was like, and how it could easily descend back into that. So I think it's important that we always protect the United States of America, the principles upon which it was founded, understand the downsides of our history, but look at where we are right now, Despite the fact that I think there's a huge cohort in this country that's trying to drag us down, we're still surviving, we're still doing extremely well, we're still hill prospering, and we're going to, because the other side, meaning the really radical progressives, I've got a lot of progressive friends, and they're great people, but the true believers, they don't like the United States of America, and they're doing their best to make sure they can undermine it in every way possible.
Wow. I knew a little bit of your story. You and I have talked about it before, but I wanted everybody watching us on Strictly Speaking to know a little bit about that and how that kind of helped shape you. Your father's worldview kind of really influenced you. So back in the 2012 presidential cycle, Mitt Romney was asked who the greatest geopolitical foe of the United States was, and he said Russia. And he was laughed at by Barack Obama. The 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. Well, here we are in 2024. Russia is in Ukraine. China is banging war drums about going into Taiwan. We are already in a different kind of war with China by way of intellectual property. They're buying up American farmland like there's no tomorrow. They're floating spy balloons across the continental United States. We're not doing anything. I'm going to ask you what they asked Mitt Romney. Right now, who's the biggest threat to the United States?
China. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Russia is a husk of what they were before. They still represent a huge threat. They've got thousands of nuclear missiles. You can't not be a threat when you've got that, okay? And they've got Putin at the helm. But China clearly has, economically, they're having some really difficult times right now, but they are an economic powerhouse nonetheless. In addition to that, they've made their designs well known. They want to be the hegemon. They want to supplant the United States of America. And they're doing everything they can blatantly to do so. And we've got, unfortunately, an administration that you wonder what is going on here. I'm not going to engage in conspiracy theories like the balloon flying the entire expanse of the United States. But the fact of the matter is,
conspiracy, though, is it?
Well, the ramifications of that, the reason for them doing that. I mean, you can go into all kinds of conspiracies.
We can look at the path that's been traveled.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They got a ton of
military
intel.
bases. And, oh my gosh, yeah.
But I'm not going to say that we've got Russian or Chinese agents. I'm not going to get into that. But regardless of the reason for it, it was something that was astonishing and shows you the aims and the designs of China. They want to supplant us. They've said it explicitly. They want to supplant us not just as the number one economic power in the world, but the number one power, period, in the world. And all the moves they've been making are fairly transparent to become that. So yeah, China without question is doing it. And what bothers me is we're doing our best to try to enable that. In almost every way we're doing, either by weakening our own military forces, economic forces, whatever it may be, but also almost actively assisting them. Kind of like a pet peeve of mine, and a little bit off kilter, is why haven't we banned TikTok by now or done something to curb TikTok? That's just a small aspect of this, but there's so many ways in which China has infiltrated into American society and affected American society that apparently we don't care. Back in the old days of the Cold War, maybe we overreacted a little bit, but we're at least more vigilant to potential threats. Now we act as if there are absolutely no threats when arguably the threats have never been greater.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable thing too, how much we are in bed with them economically as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the National Basketball Association, and Nike, and more than that, the United States federal government promising to convert 50% of all the internal combustion engine vehicles into EVs by 2030, I think. So we're only 6 years away from that. And who does that benefit more than anybody else in the world?
Right.
Because China is controlling virtually all of the mining and the distribution and so forth and the processing of all of the rare earth minerals, even if they're in Africa and other places. They stand to benefit and to literally do exactly what you just said, supplant us as the world's number one economy, and we will be their number one customer.
Yeah, what was that Khrushchev said? Words to the effect, we will sell you the rope with which we'll hang you. Something along those. I can't remember now. It's been a long time ago. But
I guarantee you Xi Jinping knows it.
Absolutely, and he's doing it right now. We are handing them the means by which they will become the world hegemon. And this administration especially, it's almost as if they're actively working on behalf of China. Think of the conspiracy theories that the left has drafted around Donald Trump, for example. If you held the left to the same standard that they held the right, you've got a lot more evidence that Joe Biden is an agent of the Chinese government than Trump was of the Russian government, correct?
That's a great point.
But nonetheless, this is where we are. We're doing a lot of stupid things. We've had the luxury as Americans to do a lot of stupid things because we're so big and strong and resourceful. But those days are coming to a close, and we could, and at least back then, we had people who truly understood what it meant to preserve freedom. Right now, I think a lot of people in positions of power, the greatest generation, the World War II generation, was in charge for much of my lifetime, and you never had to seriously worry about whether or not they were going to be vigilant about protecting American dominance in the world. Now you look around, you look around at some of these folks, and I'll name names. Somebody like a Tony Blinken, does he inspire confidence that the first thing on his mind is protecting America, or if it is, that he knows how to do so? I'm sorry, he doesn't in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the guy is just the greatest strategist in the world and is a really strong backboned American. I don't see it, and I see so much of that at upper levels, and it's not confined merely to the Democratic Party. There's a heck of a lot of those folks in the Republican Party. A lot of our elites generally, regardless of party, seem to be, quote unquote, as Barack Obama would say, citizens of the world, as opposed to citizens of the United States.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, I want to go back to Russia as the bad guys for a moment, because this allows me to start talking about your other career. People, I want people to understand this guy. You spend, I don't know how many hours a day being a lawyer and a partner in your law firm. You work for the Civil Rights Commission. You're writing articles for the National Review. You're doing radio. You are teaching law at some points in time. You're as a law professor, and somehow you decided to sit down and start writing books.
Yeah.
And one of them I hold in my hand, but I want to get to I want the origin of that. You started to talk about this off the air about the first time you started.
Yeah, I was just having fun. I wasn't planning on being an author, but I was at a deposition out in Los Angeles that didn't go forward, had nothing else to do. I was sitting in the airport for a number of hours and decided to just start scribbling. Got on the plane, 4.5-hour flight back to Cleveland from LA. Next thing you know, by the time I landed, I had 2 chapters of a book. Well, I figured I'll keep writing. Kept writing. Then I had a book. Then I didn't know what to do, so I sent it to a number of agents. And as all the literature will tell you, but I never read about this stuff because I had never intended of being a novelist, literature will tell you get 1,000 rejections. Almost nobody gets published, and even if you do get published, you've got to go through a million rejection letters, 1,000 rejection letters. I got a lot of rejection letters, but I also got some acceptances, including from, a great agent. My agent jumped on it and thought it was good enough to sell, and then he put up for auction, which was exciting. Auction? You kidding me? Yeah, so a number of major publishing houses bid upon it. We got a very, very nice deal, and I was off to the races. And it's kind of what I thought it would be was kind of my avocation, something I would do in retirement. But I've written 4 books so far, and I've got another one coming out soon, and it's a lot of fun. They are kind of like poor man's Tom Clancy type of books. They haven't been into movies like Tom Clancy's, but at least there's not yet, but there's been a little bit of interest. So it's a lot of fun. It's like being a little kid. It was like when I was a little boy playing with my army soldiers, okay? Except this is in my mind. And as I said, it's kind of, it's a combination of Tom Clancy and kind of, special forces stuff that I get from, the inspiration for it, as I say in my book, is from my brother-in-law who served 4 terms in Vietnam and is I can't use the term on air, but he's a tough guy. Yeah. He's a tough guy.
You can use the term. It's okay. We're not on a network.
Yeah, he's a badass.
Yeah,
he's a bad. Not if he sees this now, but nonetheless, he's one of. He's not part of the greatest generation, but he should have.
I don't want to belabor it, but I'm fascinated by it, and I want people to understand it a little bit. You didn't sit down and sketch out an outline,
no,
and write the beginning of your book and the end of your book, and I know what I want to happen.
Right.
You just sat down and started writing.
I did.
Just like no format, no plot in mind. It came to you as it flowed out your pen. You write long form, right? You actually write. You don't type.
You remind me that we talked about this once before. No, I didn't have a plan. I know a lot of people, and as a lawyer, typically what I would have done, like I do with my briefs, is you write out an outline of the direction which one you want. Now, you don't necessarily adhere to that
written
outline.
An essay paper, a term paper.
Precisely,
that's kind of what you do.
But for me on these, what I do is I take a pen and I get a legal pad. I don't type, at least with this. And I start writing. I just put down the. And next thing you know, the words start to come out. I'll get up at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, get a cup of coffee, and start writing. Next thing you know, I got 10 pages. And it just happens. I'm not saying it's magic or anything. I'm just saying it's just something that comes out without a whole lot of planning. Now, that's not to say that I won't go back and say shift things around on reflection. But most of it I do in a first draft, and it's so much fun. It's like being a little kid playing with my old little soldiers and tanks and stuff. But
we're gonna throw the covers of all 4 of your books up on the screen here momentarily. I've got a hard copy though of the first one. This is from 2017, Target Omega, which is an amazing thriller. It is a political / action thriller. You just said it's in the vein of Tom Clancy, and the second one is called Second Strike, and then you went into, we'll talk about W.B. Griffin in a moment, but these 2 books, is there a third one of these coming?
Yeah.
Is that the next one?
Yes, yeah, so it'll be shortly there. I don't know exactly when the publication date is, but yeah, that's coming down too. First of all,
this has been on my shelf now for weeks and weeks and weeks. I've been waiting for you to come in.
For your viewers, the cover and the titles are at least they come up with the cover. The titles are not chosen by me because I'm not big. Tom Clancy can come up with his own titles or somebody like that, but the editors come up with the titles. I'm not a big fan of the titles, just so everybody knows. But because I think the books are better than the titles.
If you could title it, what would you have titled?
It would simply start out with Omega, but from a marketing perspective, the marketing folks said, hey, there's like 40 books with omega in the title, some form of, so, you know, or distinguish
Makes
yourself.
sense.
Right. So I get it. And look, they were paying me, so what do I care?
And what would Second Strike have been called had you done?
I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
I don't recall what I had, but it was a different title. And right now, the book I'm working on currently is the working title, and I'm going to fight on this one, because this is the one I want it to be, is The Black Russian. Okay. And the premise of which is there is a Russian Special Forces guy who is you will notice there are certain characters who they resemble people in real life, but the names have been changed so to protect the innocent, and so that somebody doesn't come and give me a shiv. But nonetheless, it's about a Russian Special Forces guy who defects to the United States. And the question is he still loyal to Russia? And you'll notice who it is. There's somebody in there who is remarkably like Vladimir Putin.
Is he a double? Or?
Is he a double agent, right.
Okay.
He does remarkable things for the United States of America. He is an operator without peer. So the United States is just incredibly grateful that they've got this guy. But there's a question as to what is his ultimate objective. And so I won't go into any kind of details, but I think it's a fun read. It's the one I enjoy most. My agent thinks it's my best one by far. He's been holding on to it for quite some time, in fact, because he thinks he wants to drop it at a certain time. So I'm
well, we
excited
can't do
about it.
details, obviously, but I do have to ask, is Mike Garrett alive or not?
Mike Garrett's still alive.
Okay, his heart's not going to give out on him?
Nope.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
had to
very
ask.
good, very good.
Had to ask.
Yeah, he's still alive.
No, the other reason I thought it was fascinating to talk about this now is we're talking about the whole, geopolitical foe thing, and it's China now. I'm wondering, is there not a novel in the future coming out with, U.S.-China
It is.
relations?
I've got one kind of on the drawing board about that. It's more difficult because all the other things are a little bit more fanciful, but with China, it's almost like it's going to happen tomorrow. So it's requiring a little bit more thought, and my own view is, without being alarmist, is that we're in a precarious situation right now.
Yeah.
I always believed, and I think you and I discussed this, that if China was going to do what it wanted to do, that is take over Taiwan, they had a window. And the Biden administration was the greatest window that was ever going to be presented to them. So we now have what, maybe 10 months?
Yeah, 9 or 10 months left.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't look right now that it's imminent. But if it looked imminent, it wouldn't be as successful as it could be, right? I mean, I think China's they're not idiots about that.
No, not at all.
So, but, the prospect of a President Trump 10 months ago does two things. Number one is it sharpens China's mind a lot more, and they know that they're going to have to act now, otherwise they won't have a chance. By the same token, they may say, if we do act now, without question, there's going to be a President Trump down the road, because usually wars will cement in place the incumbent, right? Okay?
I just had a caller brought that up on the radio.
Right.
And it would make more sense for them to do something now, just because we don't like to change presidents in the middle of a battle.
I think in this particular case, I'll go against that conventional wisdom, to which I would adhere most of the time. And the reason for that is because I think I think that they know that there's a fair probability Trump's going to be president. So if they thought that Biden was going to be president in November, they'd attack now and think we can do so with impunity. But the concern is that attacking now might even prompt a more vicious response from the United States if Trump becomes president, next year sometime. So I don't know. I am not Henry Kissinger. I'm not going to prognosticate which way or how they're thinking. But regardless, we're in a precarious position because we have a leader perceived as weak. Regardless if you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, progressive, doesn't matter. This is a fact of life when it comes to history and military engagements. If you have the perception of weakness, invites aggression more than anything else.
Well, maybe it is a good idea for you to hold off a little bit on the China-U.S. Action thriller novel, because we don't want to give them any ideas. Because you're right, it may be coming soon. Real quick, though, your W.E.B. Griffin work, The Devil's Weapons, and the most recent one, it just came out around Christmas time, Zero Option. Mm-hmm. Tell us how you got involved with this.
Serendipity. I'm one of the luckiest guys around. I was minding my own business, just doing my legal work, and my agent called me and said, hey, these guys would like you to write. W.B. Griffin, great author, wrote gazillion novels. He died. And so they asked me to continue the Men at War series. And I was delighted to do so, honored to do so, and had fun doing so. And what they are is it's World War II historical fiction. And so what they said is you don't have to write like him, but you had to maintain the characters and kind of the general mindset and framework. So it was, the basis of it is the Office of Strategic Services, which was the predecessor to the CIA in World War II, and kind of a fanciful interpretation of the things they did. I'd come up with different missions that they had gone on that were grounded in things that actually happened. So if, for example, there was, we know there was a Tehran conference where Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt decided how the rest of the war was going to proceed and how they then were going to divide up the war at the end of the world, divide up the world at the end of the war. Well, there's a lot of history that's not written about that. There's a lot of things you don't know. So, if, for example, was there an assassination plot? Because that would have been a prime opportunity to take out the top 3 leaders in the world. So I came up with, kind of a plot around that, and you use the things that did happen, the history, but then the things that history doesn't tell you, you can, kind of inject fiction to it, and it's a blast to write that. So I've been doing that, and writing is something that I thought if I do retire at some point, that's what I would do, is I'd write.
Full time. Was it harder to write from, I don't want to say from somebody else's work, but you had to keep the characters, like you said. So you had to frame it around
it is hard.
And what it was, part of that series as well. So was it harder than just whatever your own concept comes up with?
It is. It is, because you can't just let your imagination run wild, because you've got certain guardrails.
Parameters.
And on top of everything else, the one good thing is, as they told me, you don't have to write like him, which was great because he's a much better writer than I am. I mean, he's a giant. So I didn't try to emulate him, but I wanted to at least have some fidelity to the themes of his books and his characters. But it is, no doubt about it, I'm a different writer, so it's going to have a little bit of flavor of Kirsanow interjected into it. But
is that series over now, or do you have
No, we're still moving along. So we've got one that's coming out now, but right now I'm concentrating on Kirsanow stuff. And
are you writing these simultaneously?
Yeah.
So one day you can.
I'm scatterbrained, Bob.
One day you can lock into your next, Mike Aaron novel, or actually, it's not going to be Mike Aaron if you're going into the China route. It's a whole new set of characters.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why not doing outlines is actually beneficial. If I had outlines, I'd get the outlines confused. This way, I just sit down, I start writing, and I can shift to another book pretty easily without having.
Back to back? Can you do that like back to back? Can you sit down?
I've done it on Saturdays.
Put away this legal pad, pull out the other one, and keep on rolling?
Yeah, I've done that. It's not the easiest thing to do.
They don't cross over in your head? Or?
I haven't noticed that it has, all right? And my editors haven't said anything about it. But nonetheless, it's something that keeps me off the streets. And when I do retire from the practice of law, I'll probably be doing this full time. What amazes me is, and maybe because I'm such a great bullshitter, I can't figure out why it's so hard for some authors not to write more, because it just comes out very easily for me. Yeah. And maybe it'll come a point where that won't happen, but it's a lot of fun.
Have you thought when you retire from the practice of law going into media full time?
No, I haven't. First of all, you have to have a voice and face for media. Yeah, well, not really. I mean, see, you're a pro. You know what you're doing. And I'm not, I'd rather be like your guest, okay? Without somebody like you, I don't think I would do very well.
I'm very fortunate to have you guest host my show, and I've heard it when you've done it, and you're remarkable at it. And you're a natural on Tucker. And
what's a blast doing it, especially with your audience. You've primed them in a way that it's great to interact with them. And, we're both conservatives. I think we probably agree on most things. I know you're rock rib conservative, which means you're just an American, right?
Yeah.
And I'm an American, and your listeners are the greatest Americans out there. Maybe it was Rush Limbaugh who said that, they were the greatest Americans. I don't know, but they're greatest Americans. And you know your listeners, and I know some of them by name. They've emailed me, which is or they come up to me when I'm doing public presentations, and it's one of the most gratifying experiences imaginable. There's Sister Mary Grace, for example, emails me long tomes. I mean, it's almost like books that she emails me. And there are a lot of other of your listeners who they've become friends over the years, and some I've gotten to know extremely well, become almost like family friends. There was one who's just recently passed away. I won't mention any names. but all great Americans.
Yeah, well, I love them too, and I know they love you. So, Peter Kirsanow, my gosh, I'm so glad to get you here into the studio. We've been trying for a while now, and I certainly hope you're feeling better soon. But thank you for coming. And I can tuck this back in with the rest of them. I wanted to be out front when you got here, but I'll tuck it back in with the rest of them, and I'll highly recommend, throw those back up on the screen again so everybody can see the books there. Target Omega, Second Strike, Devil's Weapons, and Zero Option. Those are all just the 4 that are there now. But Pete, hopefully the next time we talk, maybe on this setting, we'll have a little bit more of an idea of what the future of this country does hold over the course of the next.
Hope we're still here.
Yeah, the next 9 or 10 months are going to really determine a lot of that based on a lot of the stuff you just laid out for us. China's sitting there and wait. We didn't even talk about the Middle East. We didn't even talk about the
or getting deep into immigration too, because that in and of itself is several hours worth of discussion, and it's something that has the possibility of really changing this country profoundly. Even at the point we're at right now, I don't know that we can take another term of a Biden.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult thing to comprehend. When you look at right now, you literally have, I mean, everything, and I don't want to get too far into it here because we're trying to wrap, but everything, every element of American society right now is being impacted in some way, in a disparate way, by the unchecked flow of around 9 or 10 million illegal immigrants who have come just in the last 3 years. We're talking about everything from the education system, because they are coming into the schools, to the healthcare system because they need those things, to tourism, because people can't visit certain cities because every hotel in the city is occupied by a family of illegal immigrants that are being put up by the government and our own tax dollars. I mean, literally everything is being impacted by this. And if things don't change dramatically, not just over the next 9 months, but then as you point out for another 4 years, that the same type of thing, there will no longer be a country.
Right.
I hope that's not the case, but I mean, and I don't think that's hyperbolic to say.
It's not hyperbolic at all, and we're seeing increases in crime, increases in the costs that were expected to
I didn't mention crime, yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to watch. And aside from that, I've written a couple of articles that have since been picked. I don't know if they have not been picked up, but the theme has been picked up by national security experts. Months and months ago, I was writing about the national security impact of this. There have been hundreds of people on the terror watch list who've crossed the border. Now consider that. We know they have crossed the border. Most of these illegal immigrants present themselves voluntarily to the Border Patrol because they know there are no consequences. Terrorists are going to try to escape. So if we know that many have crossed the border, clearly many more have crossed the border. And they're not here to go on a tour. They're not here to go sightseeing. So this is profound what is happening, and the administration, the Biden administration, has allowed, their principal function is to protect the integrity of the United States of America, our sovereignty, and they've completely abdicated. They have treated America and the concept of America like an old used wash rag.
Yeah.
Incredible.
America last, if you will.
Yeah.
To borrow,
Americans have died because of this administration's policy with respect to illegal immigration. Let's just hope that it doesn't result in something cataclysmic.
Well, here's how much a fan I am of your work here, because I actually got excited there for a second, because I almost said to you, there's your next novel. Terrorists coming across the American southern border and committing all of their, atrocities here, through foreign terrorists coming across. And then I thought about it, I bit my tongue, because we don't want that. Yep. That needs to be a fictional novel, but it's in reality. I mean, it is a legitimate threat. You saw the same thing that I did just a couple of weeks back. A bunch of former FBI operatives wrote a letter.
About time.
Yeah, saying, it's coming. What happened on October 7th in Israel is coming, and they don't need to paraglide in because they've already been allowed in.
Yep. You've seen so many military-age males from hostile nations come across the border, and they are
all over the world.
Exactly. They're well
Middle
scrubbed,
East,
well
Eastern
fed.
Europe, Asian. I mean, literally from everywhere around the world they're coming.
Right. They're not here to work at a poultry farm. Not at all. These folks, you can tell, have mischief on their minds, and we're just allowing them to come in. It's one of the most extraordinary things that ever happened in the history of this nation.
Peter Kirsanow, thank you so much. Keep up the great work on the Civil Rights Commission, hopefully for another 6 years after these next 2 as well. And it's so good to have you here on Strictly
Thanks very much, Bob. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. You got it. All right. If you like what you just saw in Strictly Speaking, as we always tell you, share it. Make sure you share the link. Tell people about WatchTrueBlue.com. Tell them where they can find this episode with Peter Kirsanow. Leave comments if you would like at the bottom of this video, and we'll see you next time on Strictly Speaking.